instead of negotiating that, do you want to work on this TV show Game of Thrones? I was like, you're working on Game of Thrones? Also putting yourself in situations where failure is okay. Failure is probably going to be the outcome, but if it's not, then you've made this major milestone and accomplishment. I expect each one is going to go forward, but I also know the probability is it's going to fail, but that's not a reason to not do it. You have to do it. Otherwise, there's zero chance of success if you don't try it.
Hey, this is Ken Arcega, your host for the Manceptional podcast. Thanks for joining. Today, we've got a really cool conversation, especially if you like movies and action and sci-fi. We have Jabbar Raisani. He is a writer, director, and a special effects expert and supervisor. So he has quite a long journey, starting from childhood and being an Air Force brat. He moved around, but I guess it really started in Texas. Ended up working in LA with Stan Winston, who some of you may or may not know. They do a lot of special effects suits, should I say, and Robert Rodriguez. If you haven't heard of Jabbar, I'm sure you will, because he's really rising. He's got a movie out, but he's worked on something you might have heard of, like Game of Thrones, Iron Man, and a bunch of really cool stuff. So, Jabbar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So I've got a question for you. Maybe you can clarify it once and for all. I always wonder, why the hell are aliens lizards? Like, so your movie, Alien Outpost, right? The heavies, the aliens are lizards. There's Predator, the remake, which you worked on, lizards. The famous alien lizards. Why are aliens lizards? Like they're slimy. They've got claws. Like, how do they make all this high technology with lizard hands? Seriously.
I can't explicitly say how they do it, but I can tell you why my movie ended up with it, and I think why so much stuff has. Okay. The guy that was my production designer is a guy named Eddie Yang. His business partner is a guy named Steve Wang. Steve Wang is the guy that painted the original Predator and came up with that stippling design. And at the time, it was a very unique and original idea to take something from nature and apply it to a creature. And so he was taking the painting and pattern from frogs, I believe, and applying that to the Predator. And he's the same guy who painted the creature in my film. So in terms of the aesthetic and how we as a film watching community and culture got so obsessed with lizard and reptilian patterning on creatures, I blame Steve Wang.
So do you mean, I don't know your side of the house. I used to sell computers for rendering. And so like the texture based rendering where you put textures on things.
Even before rendering, right? Just talking the old school Predator movie, Steve, there was things like The Blob, let's say, which it wasn't really referencing anything from the real world when they made their creatures.
Right.
And there's sort of before Predator and after Predator. And on Predator, Steve was like, hey, I'm not going to paint this thing purple and bizarro and not like anything from the real world. I'm going to take reference from real things in real life. Okay. And so when he painted that, he was taking reference from real life, which was a new way of thinking about creatures for movies. Okay. But if you look up reptilian theories about aliens, like there's a ton of stuff that has nothing to do with movies. It's a real weird obsession between the reptilian and the other.
You're right, because I did look it up, and it was all about conspiracy theories and stuff.
Yeah, which one of the reasons I kind of
psychosis.
one of the reasons I leaned into it. I was like, well, people seem to be gravitating towards this as an idea. It's very much in the zeitgeist, so I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to go with it.
Yeah. I guess, I was reading a little thing about, there's the whole Roswell thing. Everything's all tied into all this stuff. But, those aliens aren't really lizards, those 50s looking aliens with the big eyes. But maybe it just grew from there. So let's kind of get back to, from everything I've been reading, when you were a kid, you were enamored with special effects. You talk about The Mummy, where you're wondering how they do the effects. right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to watch sort of everything and try to figure out how they did the effects. And, it dates back to when I was a really young kid and watching things like Indiana Jones. And,
Oh,
I
yeah.
always sort of boil it down to, okay, you could do that practically by that's a little puppet or that's a makeup. And The Mummy was the first time where I couldn't figure out how they could possibly make sand do that. And so I
Right.
got really intrigued by it and started doing a whole bunch of research and found this thing called computer animation. And once I understood what it was, I was like, well, that's what I want to do.
So that what age was that?
That was at 16.
16. You're so lucky. So at 16, you found something that's your aha moment in a sense, like, wow, this turns me on, and started initial, moments of a passion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My brother and I used to make all kinds of movies. We had a little VHS recorder, and then we had 2 VHS decks, and we would cut our own little movies on VHS.
Oh,
And
okay.
so we were both really into filmmaking. And then we saw El Mariachi came out in theaters, and we were from San Antonio. And we're like, wow, this guy's from San Antonio, and he made his own movie. And I think that was the first time I realized that it could be a career.
Okay.
And so I had that in the back of my mind, but I never really saw myself becoming that. I just thought it was really cool that it was actually something you could get paid to do, and it could be a living. And it was a guy from San Antonio, which I could identify with.
Who ironically you ended up working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe not so ironically. Maybe I just kind of was like, hey, I like that guy. I'm going to figure out how I can work with him.
Yeah. Plus, who was he was like number one, right, in that area, right? Who else?
Yeah, absolutely.
At the time. Yeah.
So it really started with those sort of a couple of things coming together, and then absolutely the aha moment of figuring out that's something I wanted to do. And then coincidentally, I got a letter in the mail from my school that said they're going to start an independent study mentorship program. And one of the potential things you could do was computer animation. It was all made up. Someone had just written that amongst a bunch of other careers on a piece of paper. And I was like, well, wait a minute, I could possibly do that through this program. And so that really was all these different things sort of coming into alignment.
You read a lot of stuff about people executing on their goals, and sometimes it's a combination of you've got a hard set idea, and you go towards it, and some things kind of meander, and you kind of end up there because you have a natural interest. Sounds like you just had your interest in, when you put yourself in that position, anything that opens up in that area, you just jump on that path. You don't know exactly where it's going yet, but you enjoy it. You have a passion for that, and you're just going to go for it and just see where it goes. Is that kind of the mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew I had an interest. I had no idea how you actually turn that interest into a career, but I just continued to keep my eyes open for how I might be able to move closer and closer towards that goal. And any opportunity that came up, I would just take it.
So even now, you've done a lot more since then. When you approach a project, are you as excited now as when you were a little kid? Like, okay, what's there's more to it now, right? Because you're getting into, you're writing and directing, so there's story, but even the special effects and, the alien in your movie and the like, do you still get as excited as when you were a kid on that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm fortunate enough now that I only go after projects that excite me. So, it's not a coincidence that I ended up on Game of Thrones. I had read all of the books multiple times and heard they were making it a show, and then just was methodically figuring out how I could get onto it.
And how did you?
I was trying to get onto it, and I didn't have anyone that was connected to it. And eventually I ended up working on this movie Fright Night with a visual effects supervisor, Joe Bauer, and kind of didn't think about it again, and was about to go work on a project with the director of Predators, Nimrod Antal, and called Joe to say, hey, I'm going to, VFX supervise this movie. I want to talk about contracts, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, instead of negotiating that, do you want to work on this TV show, Game of Thrones? I was like, I'm working on Game of Thrones. He had never, it was before it was really, it was before it was really popular. So he didn't really, he didn't really know what he was offering me. And I was very aware of what the project was and how big it could be. And so I said yes to him. And then 6 days later, I was in Belfast.
Holy crap, that fast.
Yeah.
Well, you guys
Yeah.
had a working past, so it wasn't like he, it wasn't from scratch, right? It's probably.
Yeah, I knew him really well, but the process of getting into HBO is very extensive. So I had something like 4 interviews in 5 days, and then the next day was on a flight.
Wow, that's amazing. So that's something I want to ask you about. Just like in anything else, where networking could be important, it seems to me like the business of Hollywood, a lot of it is people who you know, right? But not by accident. You need to work with people, build a reputation, word of mouth. I mean, is that a big part of navigating around, just like this happened for you?
Yeah, absolutely. But I started with no one. I started in San Antonio, as far as LA as I thought I could be,
Right.
and then just over years and years and years, worked my way in and grew my network, and just grew my body of work in a way that pushed me into the direction that I wanted to go.
Right. But that's what I mean. Yeah. I mean, you have to start where you're at slowly, but once you get a little bit of stuff behind you, those connections start to multiply, I guess, a lot faster as you get into bigger projects, right? More people hear about you, you work on more stuff, and then more opportunities open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you talked about the Winston Studios thing, which was kind of your first. Was that when you first moved to LA? You got in there, or no? You went back to you went LA first. You worked on some stuff. Went back to Rodriguez.
No, I had only worked on. So I moved out to LA in 2004, and then my brother actually had moved out to be a writer before I did, and I was living on his couch and trying to get a job in visual effects, and ended up getting a job at a pre-visualization company called Pixel Liberation Front, and was working on Superman Returns. And previs, as it's called, wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it was a way in. And after working there for 6 weeks, Stan Winston Studio called and said, "Hey, we got your resume. We're going to do this movie, Fantastic Four." And I think an important thing in Hollywood, probably in all business, is not burning any bridges. And I really wanted that Stan Winston job, but I also wasn't willing to burn a bridge at PLF who'd given me this opportunity.
Right.
So I didn't take the job outright. I went back to the guys at PLF and said, "Hey," I was very honest with them. I said, "This is my dream job working here. Obviously, I've taken this job. I will do it to completion. I will finish this movie if that's what you say I need to do to keep our relationship positive, but I really want to do this." And
yeah, but I really want to bail.
Yeah, and they really appreciated that I didn't just bail. And I'm still in touch with the guys that I worked with over there, and I've worked with them many times since, and been able to hire them on certain projects. So it's like,
right.
It's a different thing if you can figure out ways to navigate in which you don't burn bridges and you're able to keep everyone happy, even if it means you're taking a risk at not getting where you want to get as fast. I think in the long run, you have a larger group of people that you can lean on and reach out to in the future, which for me has been, really essential.
Yeah. I mean, especially like, in a business so driven by those personal connections, you're going to do the short-term thing and burn people. That's going to come back and haunt you in almost anything, right? It's like, oh, that guy, he'll just fly with the wind.
Yep.
It's not solid. Would you say, so, at this point you've done, at this point in our discussion, you've done a lot of really cool effects stuff, but then you had mentioned about being on the set with Jon Favreau with Iron Man, where you actually saw like a movie set, and then all of a sudden you're like, I want to be a director. Is that kind of how that went down?
Yeah. I mean, so initially I was doing all visual effects related projects and visual effects related jobs. And I'd been on set some on some commercials. But, a commercial isn't for me a story, even though, yes, there is storytelling in commercials. It wasn't the kind of storytelling that I was interested in doing, other than supporting them in a visual effects role. And then when I went on set for Iron Man, it was just such a different animal, and getting to like read the script and see that come to life a little bit. It was a new aha moment where, I was also at the time, I think I was 24 or 23
Jeez.
and supervising within, our project and my department at Sam Winston. And I realized that, the ceiling was close in that role.
That was
And,
it.
even if I spent another few years there, then that was kind of as high as I could go in that department and in that position. And so I think I naturally always am looking for like, what's the next goal? What's the next thing I can reach for?
That's cool.
And it's not even an active thing that I think that I don't think about, oh, I'm getting near this and I need to try this. I think just inherently somewhere deep down, I sense the fact that the challenges are running out. I need to find that next thing that's going to challenge me and excite me. And so that, again, I think a lot of this is timing. I was hitting that point and happened to see this new thing, and this new thing being directing, and that really perked my attention in a way that changed my path again.
Right. And so at this point, you're almost resetting back to the bottom, right? I mean, because you've got the effects stuff behind you. You do have a foundation, but now being a writer and getting into being a director, that's a different game, really, right? You're not part of the machinery of making, of executing on something that someone already thought of and is directing. You're like, you want to originate your own project now and direct it. So did you feel like you were starting from scratch, or could you leverage some of your contacts that you had in the effects to get into this new step up or forward, should we say?
I think fortunately I was naive enough to think I wasn't starting over.
Okay.
Which made it easier because then it felt like I was starting higher than I was. But ultimately, yeah, it's a full restart. And the connections that you have in visual effects they help to a degree, but ultimately it's a reboot. And it can in fact be a negative to have a different career in visual effects as you start pursuing writing and directing, because you get put into a box of that guy's an effects guy. Right. That guy's not a storyteller. He's going to be too focused on the effects, on the visuals, on the action, and not enough on the characters, on the story. And so it actually works against you depending on who you're talking to.
Right. So the Black Knight Decoded, which was a Pepsi, it's not a commercial, but a short story that you did. I really liked that. I watched the long version, which was more story, more characters, as opposed to a shorter, kind of more commercially edited type thing. You came up with that story, right? Did you win the contest, or how did that happen?
No. So initially that was a Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry. What's the guy's name on?
And for the listeners, you should look it up. You can find it on YouTube. It's called Black Knight Decoded, and or it's on Vimeo. I can't remember, but it's there's two versions. In the long version, it's a really nice story, and it has Frida Pinto in it.
Yeah, Frida Pinto, David Oyelowo. But so it was a script that initially existed, and I had the same manager as David Oyelowo, and I wasn't in love with the script, but I loved some of the ideas, and I sort of pitched a different take on the idea that I would do if David Oyelowo would do it, and he really liked that idea, and so that got that whole thing off the ground. But it was it was a short film that was meant to be purely narrative, sort of 12 to 15 minutes, and then at the end of the day, when Pepsi had the final thing, they decided they wanted to make this music video commercial thing, and that's why there's two versions. So they did their version, which is this kind of more music video driven song release with a video. It's kind of strange. I actually didn't fully understand or connect with the final thing that they created, but I'm really happy with the version that I created. And
is that the long version?
That's the long version. Yeah. So that's the director's cut.
Yeah.
So I mean, on the positive side, they allowed us to split it and for me to finish a director's cut and have that as my piece. But it was really sort of I'll say a bait and switch, where it was like, you're going to do your thing, which is this short film, and then at the last month, they decided they wanted a music video, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. We didn't shoot a music video.
Right. So did they actually take all the files and they made their own edit, or did they make you do it?
No, I worked with them on it. I mean, I wanted their version to be the best version of the thing they wanted. So
because it still had your name on it. So
yeah, exactly. So exactly, understanding that, look, it still has a purpose, even if it's a purpose for Pepsi, which ultimately, they paid for it. So I'm a director for hire. So I need to do the job that I'm hired to do. And that job ultimately became making that version. But again, getting to make both versions. So that was kind of sort of the compromise was, look, you're still going to make your version. We just need the best version of ours. And I think fortunately, both of us realized that if I made a version that wasn't my favorite, they'd have the best version of the one they needed. So it was better for both of us.
Okay. Well, for the listeners, look up both versions. I definitely enjoyed. Before I knew the little behind the scenes, I liked the long version because you get the story and it kind of builds, and it's kind of cool. So that that's actually a good question. Like, how much do you end up kind of being a slave to the masters, meaning the people who are funding it, right? They have a say, or I guess it would be the executive producers. You get into a project, you watch movies and you wonder, like, how did it end up like this, and you got so many fingers in the pie. How much, when you get into a project, do you have to change things for the people who paid for it?
It just depends on the thing you're making and who's making it. It's really drastically different from project to project. Okay.
And are you at the point where, well, it seems like to me, like anytime you take other people's money, they do kind of have a say, right? I mean,
they do have a say, but HBO's kind of motto is hire the right people and walk away. And I think Netflix and Legendary have a similar working style. So they have notes and they have thoughts, but they're hoping to. Their goal is to put the right people in the right places and trust them to make creative decisions. So I find that to be the best environment in which to work.
Yeah, and that actually, I know you weren't in the military, but your father was. As you said, that is kind of a military thing with good leaders, is that they put the people in place, and then they, those people are responsible, and you trust that they're going to do their job, and you let them do it. You don't micromanage them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. Okay, so from the you're at this point now. How do you get from coming up now with your first script? Was this during the time you were working Game of Thrones? You came up with the idea for Alien Outpost, right?
Yeah, it actually started just before Thrones, and then like I said, Thrones is a bit of a whirlwind start. So I had given a draft to my management company, and then I just left, and I wasn't really trying to sell it, and I was just working on Thrones, focused on Thrones, and production company out of the UK happened to contact my management company, and we're looking for sort of the exact idea that happened to be. Okay. And then I had to go in and pitch it, and it was a ton of work after that to actually get the movie greenlit. But
so do they just say, "Hey, this is interesting, but we need more. We need to understand this more." Like, how would you make it? Or
yeah, I mean, it wasn't written to be a small movie. Like it's a very small independent film. That's what we ended up making. It was written as a much larger, $20 to $30 million action film back when they were making $20 to $30 million movies.
Right.
Since then we kind of bifurcated into there's the 5 and under, and there's 100 and over.
150.
Yeah. So there's that whole market has gone away, unfortunately.
What, the small one? You mean the 30 million, the mid-range one?
The mid-range feature market is kind of gone, which is unfortunate. It was sort of bad timing for me to try to become a film director, because the movies where you would cut your teeth were these sort of smaller budget. Back in the day, they're called creature features. There were these for a guy like me. It was effects-driven movies, whether it be practical or digital or both, that were in the sub $30 million range, where they would give people an opportunity to make a feature that hadn't before. And that market is for all intents and purposes dead.
Really, they're just people aren't willing to take the risk. Is that why?
Yeah, so you get a lot more people moving into episodic, and I don't really use the term television anymore because it's sort of a different beast. You look at like a Game of Thrones and Lost in Space, and the budgets, while no, they're not yet getting up to the level of Avengers, but the gap is closing, and I think the quality gap is closing, and audience engagement is going up and up and up in episodic television. And I mean, honestly, when I look at features now, features are basically episodic. All the superhero movies are just this one leads into this one, leads into this one. So they're almost becoming a more similar medium than they were 10 years ago, when a feature film and a television series were very different animals.
Yeah. And actually, I wanted to ask you that, just like the direction things are going, because my viewing habits, I try not to get too hooked on stuff, because I get hooked in hook, line, and sinker, right? Like Game of Thrones, I avoided watching that till it was already season 5, and I'm like, let me see what this is about. I just turned on the first episode, and I binged that thing all the way straight through,
right?
All 5 seasons, dude. 2 a.m, just one more. But they're really enjoyable, more than, well, I love feature films too, but it just like, where is the industry? Is it like 30% episodic and then still 70% films? I mean, like Netflix is huge, Amazon, these companies are coming out with hits on the episodic type stuff that seems viable. Like, it's not a negative thing if you're working on one of those shows compared to a feature film, right?
No, I mean, I think the perception has changed. And again, it's the same where I don't really use the term television series anymore, because that has a certain connotation that I think is no longer applicable.
Right.
In terms of the percentages, I really don't know, but they're making less feature films than they ever have per year, and they're making more series every year than they ever have per year, and that continues to go down that path. So I think ultimately there's so much more content that is episodic than feature films. And
right.
I mean, for me personally, and I look at the price of a movie theater ticket, and it's a month of Netflix that I can get for one ticket to one movie.
That's a good point.
So it's like, I don't know what happens. I like this idea of Movie Pass. I signed up for Movie Pass, and it's like, oh, you can actually go see as many movies as you want. And
I was thinking about that. Is it cool?
Yeah, it is. It's great. I feel like in a way that it's going to move to more, if theaters stay around, which I hope they do, it moves into more of a, you pay per year and you go see what you want to see. And that way they have a guaranteed amount of money that theaters are going to make. I feel like that model, I hope that model can work, because the model of, taking your family forward to a movie and spending $100, like, I don't see how that's sustainable.
Yeah. And there's so much content out there that you're right. The value for that price is, it's a hard buy. I mean, they're trying to lure you in with the super sound and 3D and, all that kind of thing. But you can get a lot out of just watching a Netflix episodic show. Right?
Yeah. And I feel like the quality of viewing at home has gone way up. When you get like a 4K HDR television with an Atmos sound bar, it's like, no, it's not a theater, but it's a much better viewing experience than I had 10 years ago.
Yeah. So what do you think of that whole thing? Do you think there's, I know this is like, we're really going off a little tangent here, but what can the theaters do to entice you versus what you can do at home? I mean, what are they going to have, the seats move and vibrate, or, smell-o-vision, or, I mean, what can they do? Because it is getting a lot better at home.
Well, I mean, they're starting to replace the projection with large scale, I think, LED technology, which looks amazing. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of, but I don't think it's a question of hardware. I think it's content. Right. I think you're going to get people into the seats if you have content that's compelling. I don't think it's vibrating seats that's going to pack movie theaters.
Right. So now, how does this whole thing affect your future, what you're looking at your future? Because I would think writing an episodic series concept is different than doing a big blockbuster movie concept, right?
For sure, it's different. But I after Outpost wrote one pilot that it never got made, but it sold. So I've been working in tandem with features and television in terms of writing.
Okay.
The the good thing about episodic is that you can direct an episodic even if you don't write it, which is true in features as well. But as an up and coming director, it's much more likely you're going to direct something that you wrote than get hired onto, especially thinking of like a tentpole movie. Just the odds are very low that you're going to be hired to do that, having not had a big success that was an indie feature, let's say.
Right.
So there's an opportunity to cut your teeth and develop as a director, even if you're not writing that material in series. So that's where things like Lost in Space are really appealing to me, because it's the bread and butter of what I love to create, which is sci-fi, robots, space opera. All that stuff is very appealing to me, but I don't have to be the one that sells the script to get to direct it.
Now you're the effects, listed as the effects supervisor for that. Are you also going to direct some episodes? It doesn't, like IMDb, I looked it up, and doesn't say anything about directing. Are you?
No, it's listed there. So I'm the second unit director on it. So I direct.
Oh, it is? Okay, I missed that. Okay.
So I second unit directed the first season, and then I've supervised all the visual effects as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I noticed with all these episodic ones, there's always a different director for each one, because they're probably working. Do they work on a couple episodes at the same time, like because they have the sets there? Do they work like in parallel, or no? Do they just go and
not in parallel, but one after another. Sometimes working in blocks of two. So we'll have directors that do multiple episodes, and they tend to in series to block them. So you have 2 episodes that you shoot. You can shoot them simultaneously. So like on Thrones, for example, you go and shoot all the stuff that we're going to do in Croatia. We're going to shoot at once because we're all in Croatia right now.
Okay. So I got to ask you the Game of Thrones question. Man, so the last season now is pushed back a whole year, which sucks, as a viewer. And I read something that a lot of that has to do with they have a smaller, a smaller staff or something. So you can only it takes longer to film. Is that true? Or is there some other stuff going on?
I mean, I'm not working on it, so I'm not really sure, but I believe the case is that they are filming in Belfast. So on previous seasons, you'd have as many as 3 units going simultaneously because you're in different countries.
Okay.
But I would assume that the characters are moving into the same storylines now, so you can't really shoot simultaneously like they used to.
Right. Okay. So that could make it take longer because you're not covering as many things at the same time, right?
That's what I would guess is happening. But like I said, I'm not working on it, so I'm just speculating.
Okay. So Jabbar, your mic seems to be rubbing on your beard or something, rubbing on your shirt or something.
Oh, okay. I'll just clip it.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. Is that any better?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up an audio thing. So I wanted to ask you, when you're, you're basically on set and you have to manage the production, and you've got all these people, right? You've got how many people? Let's say Lost in Space. How many people are you managing when you're directing?
It's sort of hard to say. That there's probably around 50 people actually on set, and then from there, each department has a lot of people that are supporting them that aren't standing right immediately on the set, but are in their trucks and around to support. So if you say, "Oh, I need to change the wardrobe on this person," the person that's on set tells the people that are back on the truck, and they come bring out that from the truck. So there's probably 100 people all in, maybe more.
Right. So you walk on set. You guys start super early in the morning?
It just depends on what you're filming. If you're filming a scene that starts that it happens during the day, yeah, most likely. If you're filming a night scene, you may be coming in at 5 p.m. and shooting all night.
Okay. So you come on set and everyone's looking at you. Okay. Tell us what to do. What's your style, and have you of managing people, right? This is kind of a general thing, managing people, right? So leadership, what's your style And do you have any directors that you are kind of following, or any mentors that you ask, how do I get everybody moving in the same direction and make it very efficient?
I'd say it's not mentors that I've really asked. Directing is kind of a weird thing. It's so busy that it's not like you can sort of sit and chat with someone while they're doing it and talk to them about what they're doing and why. It's more of a observational thing. So, I've had the good fortune of working with some amazing directors, but one guy that I've worked with more than any other is a guy named David Nutter, and he works on Game of Thrones pretty much every season. He's working on the last season now. Mm-hmm. I did the Flash pilot with him. I did a different pilot with him a few years after that, and he directed on Lost in Space as well. Okay. So I just kind of watch a person like that, and I watch all directors that I work with, and I sort of cherry pick the things that feel like they are very specific to the way that I would like to work. And the thing that I've taken away more than anything is just be prepared. A lot of directing and management in general is just being prepared to have all of the information that's possible, because when questions come up, you want to be the person that has the answers and not the questions. But it's also okay to not have answers, and that's something that it took me a little while to learn. I luckily learned it when I was visual effects supervising as opposed to directing, because in that role, you're head of a department on a set, and things come up that you may not know the answer to, and it's fine to not know the answers. And there's a whole team of professionals that you can turn to and say, hey, I don't know the answer to this, but I think you probably have an idea. What do you think we should do here? And once I realized it was fine to not have all the answers, I think it was freeing for me, because then it's, your management style is know everything you can and be confident in the choices that you know the answers to, but also be ready and willing and open to tell people when you don't know and turn to the experts that do know and lean on them for their support.
So you just kind of roll, at some point you have to roll with the terrain, so to speak, right? I mean, things are changing, something comes up, you got to roll with that and overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully I think the saying is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So
that's a great, I like that.
Always try to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are.
Right. Do you have any stories that come to mind where you were in charge and something came up and you're like, oh shit, I don't know what to do? And but let's say before you kind of understand a little bit more now how you roll over those type of things and solve them. But when you're starting out, do you have any moments?
Sure. I mean, we had, I won't get too specific to not call out the individuals involved, but right. I had a project I was directing on, and it turned out one of the actors was intoxicated repeatedly on set, and that was something I was like, I have no idea how I'm supposed to handle this. And I really turned to my producers and said, hey, this has been brought to my attention. I didn't realize it was going on, but now we need to deal with it. And leaning on those people in an instance like that, and not having to deal with it solely on my own is a really liberating experience, because that stuff can be overwhelming if you're like, wow, I have to figure out how to make this really, really difficult situation be resolved. And having supportive people that you trust and can rely on just makes those decisions easier.
Yeah. So, when you're approaching filming something that day, there's all the technical stuff that you have to make sure is lined up, and in your mind, you've got an idea how, if there's any effects in it, how that's going to play in. But then you have the people aspect, the actors, right? And you're trying to get them to perform, the story, which is ultimately what it's about. So those are two different things, right? Making sure that they're comfortable and in the vibe, and then all the technical stuff going around you. So is that literally bifurcated? There's just two sections, or how do you deal with that all at one time? All at the same time?
I mean, hopefully you've dealt with as much as possible ahead of time. That's what makes all the difference. Ideally, I go in knowing both the technical and creative side what I want to capture, And then, of course, you have to deviate as necessary. But yeah, it's definitely a bifurcation of you work with your cinematographer and your crew on all things, technical and technical/creative, and you work with your actors on everything that's performance related. And for both of those people that you have to interact with, or all of those people you have to interact with, you need to know the answers, both technical and creative, that guide the project towards what you want to capture.
Right. Okay. So maybe a lot of actors would like to hear about this. So you got characters for Alien Outpost, and I also want to talk about your new project. So when you're casting, how do you know? How do you know as a director, writer, director that that's the right person? That would be if actors could know that. That would be like the secret. You could probably charge $1 million for it. How do you know as someone that's choosing your actors?
I mean, I would say that there are certain people that you feel embody a character it's easier to talk about from a writer director. So when I write stuff, I have something that's pretty clear in my head in terms of performance, not necessarily absolutely what they look like, but how they embrace the character and embody that character. And on Outpost, I looked at literally thousands of reels, and then met with hundreds of actors in person. So it's part of the process. Is we're casting something like 13 roles, and it's an ensemble cast. So it's not like
right. So they have to get along with each other too. It's not just one off, right? It's not just each.
Yeah. So we would do reads with we know we're going to use this person. Let's use this person and have them come and read in with these three finalists, if you will, for this role. So. So step one is like, do I feel like this person does or could embody the character as I see it? And if it's a yes, then I, sort of put them in this pile over here. And then I try to sort that based on who I thought embodied it the best or had the potential to do so. And then I meet with them and I, we will read a scene or two, and I'll give them direction and see how they adapt to the tuning that I do in the room with them, and if they're able to adjust their performance to get closer to what I have in my head. And if they can, then we're getting closer. And if they can't, then they sort of get sifted out at that phase. But I met with some people even 3 times before I was really like, okay, this is definitely the person. It's just it's a process of whittling down and narrowing that stack and getting to the last few people that you think really are that role.
So even when they're coming in, let's say they could have come in 2 or 3 times and they're doing a read with a group, right? So even at that point, they don't have it nailed yet, right? They're still, right? Because if they don't jive, they might be good on their own. They don't jive with the team. They're still not in that role. They're still fighting for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the unfortunate thing for actors is, some of it has nothing to do with, or a lot of it has nothing to do with your performance and what you did exactly. There's a ton of things that are just logistical. You know what I mean? Like once you start to cast and lock people in, it's like, especially in this sort of age of really pushing diversity on camera is, hey, we have a bunch of people that look very similar here. We should try to branch out and diversify this cast. I think it's important in that we're better representing society, and it's important, from a financial standpoint. People like international casts. That now that we're an international market and a global market for content, people want to see people that look like them. They want to see themselves on camera. I think we're in a new era of sort of what a cast looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously you can see that in all the movies, and hopefully you can do it in a way that's not so obvious. Like you always have, there's always the Asian guy, there's the black guy, there's the Latino guy. I mean, you see it in every movie, even big franchises like Fast and Furious, right? You've got all those things. Does that ever get in the way of just making the story that you want if you're trying to take these things into account, or you just try to do it in a way that doesn't stick out, I
mean, hopefully you're doing it in a way that it fits the story. I'll just say Lost in Space, for example, because I'm working on it now. it's a group that is leaving Earth that is made up from people from all over the world. So that it makes a lot of sense to have an international cast. On something like Outpost, again, it was an international force that is the USDF. They're coming together from all over the world to create this team, this platoon, if you will. So it just depends. And certain things they're not built for that. And I think you have to be very careful to not force it in a way that takes the audience out or breaks the story. But I think more and more stories are finding ways from the ground up of doing a better representation of the real world. You know what I mean? The real world does have all kinds of people. Look, I live in Los Angeles, so I probably am in a place where I see far more variation amongst people than someone who may, when I was in Texas. You know what I mean? There's not the same variety there, but still, I think again, in a metropolitan area, you're probably getting more variety than was represented on screen 20 years ago.
So how much, China is a big player now. They've come in, they've bought a lot of the big Hollywood studios. You'll notice in a lot of movies, it's a Chinese production company or what have you. Alibaba is a big one. So are you thinking about, do you target stuff that would try to hit that audience? Like The Rock just did Rampage. I think he opened it in China. They've got a lot of Chinese marketing there. Has that touched you at your level and what you're trying to do yet?
I mean,
hit that market.
It's touched me in that, Lost in Space is done by Legendary, which is owned by a Chinese company. So, they pay me.
Right.
Has it affected me in a way that it's changed the way that I think about creating? No. They're making content just like everyone else is making content. And I think everyone who's making the type of content that I make, which is, broader audience, international projects, they're already after the global market. So I don't think the Chinese market is part of that global market. And so, we're targeting China just like they're targeting America, just like everyone's targeting the whole world. So it hasn't really changed the way that I storytell.
Okay. In terms of distribution and releases, it was always, they always seem to count the worldwide separate and target US because that was the biggest market. Is that changing now? Or I think I just mentioned the Rampage I didn't look into. I thought that was kind of launched in China, or at least he made a big deal out of it. Is that, is it to the point where there's parity everywhere, or is the US still the biggest chunk? There's the different windows of distribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a whole, the U.S. is still the biggest market, but certain films perform better in China than anywhere else. I think the Pacific Rim series. I think that the reason they continued making those movies, I think they've made 2 now, and I wouldn't be surprised to make 3, is because it does really, really well in the Chinese market, and it does well enough all over. But if you look at the Chinese numbers versus the U.S. numbers, it's not something that American audiences are going out in droves to, but the Chinese market really loves that film. So
I actually liked it when I saw the first one, and I had low expectations, and I actually liked it a lot. So another kind of trend or thing that's in the news is the whole Me Too thing, right? And as someone that's casting people, do you ever have people that are trying to use some personal, personal moves on you to try to get a role?
I mean, I'm not an actor, so I don't know.
No, but you as you're casting actors, so does a female ever come in?
Or
no, maybe even a male and try to, have you been in that position?
No, I've never been in a situation in which that was going to be used as a bargaining chip to get a role.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I have to assume generally that is a top-down type move, as in the person that is in control is the one that's attempting to use that as leverage, as opposed to the other way around. Well, granted, it may work both ways, and I'm sure it has before, but no, nothing I've ever run into.
You haven't seen that on your okay. So let me ask you this, kind of going back to making a movie. So let's say you're in the business a little bit, and you've got your like when you went to that UK company, that was all through your management company, like that found you funding for the film. How would somebody, is that the path now that you find a management company to make that connection? Or, I mean, I know a lot of people that are trying to write a script and want to make a movie. What would be the best path for them?
Oh man, it's really hard to say. It's like everybody's path is different. So
okay, so there's not one answer to that.
No, there is no way, and no, there is no way to follow. You know, the best thing to do is you have to write your content and direct as much of your own content as you can, and just stick with it and work until you get good enough that someone's recognizing you. Because I think there's a tendency to think that you're Quentin Tarantino after you make your first short film because you love it, but you're probably not, and not yet. And you know, there's not many of him, and I think it's a long game. You know, I think a lot of people, and myself included, thought, "Hey, I'll make a few shorts, and then I'll do a feature, and then I'll pop, and then I'll be off and running." And you know, the industry is a much more long term reward system than that.
So did you have that moment where you made something, let's say Alien Outpost, and like, this is it, the next James Cameron?
No, I wouldn't say
you're not.
I wouldn't say I was confused enough to think I was James Cameron.
But you know what I mean. But you just thought, you know, I'm off to the races, right? This is it.
But sure, I mean, you know, it opened a lot of doors in that I was able to have a lot of meetings, and it got me a lot of traction. But it wasn't enough to when the rubber hit the road. It wasn't enough to take off. And again, part of it for me was my timing was not great. You know, I was hitting the market when less and less movies were being made, especially in the next project for me would have been, okay, now slightly higher budget, and those projects just weren't made. I mean, even in the year talking with the finance company that raised the money for my movie, they said if we had gone out with the exact same packet a year later, we would have gotten half the money that we got. So the market was changing quickly and deteriorating in a way for the type of films that I was going to make. Okay,
so you know, taking that into account, now you're working on a couple different projects. So how is that? How has the terrain changed? And how do you have to, navigate? Like, so Capturing the Dead is one that you're doing, and then Pulse. So how do you have to navigate differently now with the way things are?
I mean, I would say I've deviated even since. So those are two projects that are in development, but I'll move those into the in development hell pile, which means they'll probably never happen.
Really?
Yeah.
How much of in development just means you're pitching something and trying to get it together, but who knows if it'll happen? What's the percentage?
It's in terms of numbers, it's hard to say, but I think, you know, until something you're on set shooting the first day of production, it's in development. And the odds of it going from being something you work on to in production, you know, it's probably 0.1% of projects. I mean, it's a really, really low number if you think about all the people working on their ideas. And something, again, I didn't realize when I even got a movie made, the odds were so low. And I had people telling me, most people, this takes 6 to 8 years to get your first project off the ground. I was lucky to do it in under 2. So I just didn't realize how lucky I was at the time, which again speaks to the naivety of being young and thinking that again I didn't think I was James Cameron or Quentin Tarantino, but I thought I was on my way in a way that I was not.
Right, but that's a good thing you were though, right? Because you just kept going, not knowing any different, and you made it happen.
Yeah, so sometimes it works to your advantage, your lack of knowledge.
Right.
So ultimately, how have I changed what I'm doing? I'm now I'm working on a Netflix show because there's a lot of opportunity at Netflix because of the amount of content they're making.
Right.
I worked with HBO for years, and I love working with HBO, but they aren't making the quantity of series that or features that Netflix is. So there's just more opportunity. So for someone at my level, it does become a bit of a numbers game. I need to be at a place that's making a lot of stuff because there's a lot of opportunity for advancement. And,
Right.
At a place that is making less content, even if it's really high end content, they have the people they've been working with for the past 20 years that they rely on. And me being the guy that's doing visual effects that wants to do the other thing, they really love for you to do visual effects because you do it well. They're not quite as
Right.
keen on saying, hey, why don't you try directing this episode of this, where I think for me, there's a lot more opportunity in the areas in the companies that are willing to try new things, the Netflix, the Amazons of the world that are saying, hey, the studio system is their system and we're going to do it our way. And that's exciting to me too, as someone that, I come from a computer science background. I come from a technology background, and I like the idea of inventing things that are new and trying new and different things and figuring out what works, and it being an iterative process as opposed to a system. I don't like rigid systems that are not created to iterate and change and evolve. And that's what's exciting to me about Netflix.
So, if there's a philosophy or tactic here, one thing we try to do is try to, for the audience, is glean like 6, tactics or philosophies that helped you navigate successfully. It seems from what you're telling me now, one of them would be, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm inferring this from what you're saying. You need to put yourself in a position where there's a lot of potential opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at all times I'm looking for what is the opportunity that leads to that next thing that I'm after. I think first and foremost, it's figuring out what you're after, and that can continually change. And based on my industry and what I'm doing, it has to change all the time, and the path to that thing has to change. So, I may be like, the next thing I'm going after is a $10 million feature, but as you watch that path erode, you have to be able to deviate and say, okay, that's not actually a viable goal. I need to adjust that goal to be the thing I can actually attain, because I think trying to achieve a goal that is ultimately out of reach, and sometimes that's hard to judge, can be really frustrating and be sort of soul destroying. And after Outpost, I spent probably 2 years trying to get that next feature off the ground that was in that $10 million range, and even in a lower range. Capturing the Dead was actually a much smaller project that we were trying to get funding for, and it just was not coming together. And it was optioned. So I had sold the script, and it looked like everything was going to go forward, and it just got stuck. And it took a while to realize that that path was sort of gone, and I had to change what the target was in order to get forward progression again.
Right. That must suck to think. I mean, if someone's buying the option for it, you think you're moving forward, right? And you're probably a lot of times running on that with you thinking this is going to go. And at some point, like you said, 2 years later, you come to the realization that it's not, and you need to adjust fire. That's, like you say, you have to adjust, but that's got to be hard, especially if you put everything into this one thing and you just focus on that, right? Tunnel vision. You might be kind of screwing yourself over in a way, like getting stuck in off to the side.
Yeah, it is. It's really difficult, and it's hard to accept when those things are done and dead, and that's not a path worth putting any more effort and time into. And I think I've learned over the years in the film and series business, like that's just the way it works. And it takes a long time to learn that, and to not only learn that, but to be okay with that, because at first it's just, you feel like you're failing, and you do fail most of the time. Like I said, it's like the number of projects that get made are such a small number compared to the ones that people are working on, and myself included. I've had, I don't know, a very small handful of projects that I've actually started, come to fruition and completion. Most of them die, and it's really frustrating until you sort of accept that, okay, I'm going to take each one of these things and learn from it in a way that makes me better. So the next thing I do, I have a larger network of people, because I met a bunch of people on that last thing that even if it didn't go, I've learned a lot as a writer. I've learned a lot as everything that you can take away from it, you take away and you move on to the next one, being in a better position than you were on the previous one.
Okay. So that actually sounds like kind of a way for the listeners doing their own various, passions and all that to execute. You kind of have to you work hard, you keep going, and, you take each opportunity as it comes and try to make something out of it, but be prepared to take what you can from that and navigate sideways. And, you're moving forward generally, but you could be going up, down, back, and you just have to roll with that. I mean, you can't control that, it seems.
Yeah, and I think that the trick is, and it's not an easy one to learn, is just to get up and keep going and do it again, and go back and do it again, even if it means you can fail again. And also putting yourself in situations where failure is okay. Failure is probably going to be the outcome, but if it's not, then you've made this major milestone and accomplishment, and then you can use that and move forward. So
right.
That's how I look at all of these projects. Is I don't go into them expecting that they're going to fail. I expect each one is going to go forward, but I also know the probability is it's going to fail. But that's not a reason to not do it. You have to do it. Otherwise, there's zero chance of success if you don't try.
Yeah. That's something that I've picked up in the course of my podcast, is basically, or actually that and reading a lot of books. You know what the outcome is if you do nothing. Like you can guarantee the outcome of doing nothing is nothing.
Right.
So Jabbar, what would be what's your ultimate setup? Where do you want to be with all this in your life? What's your ultimate goal?
I mean, I think that, way down the road, that I love, if I think about a series like the first season of True Detective, that's one director directing all episodes of an episodic series. I love the idea of doing that because I think there's a lot of room for creativity, and there is a level of quality you're able to reach by having one person's vision seen through all episodes that is really effective. So I'd love to do something like that. And then, getting back into the feature world and getting into the big feature market. I'd love to direct, a Marvel movie. I'd love to direct Thor 17.
Oh yeah. What do you think about? I haven't seen Infinity Wars yet, but like you said, all these movies, it is kind of like a big screen episodic thing where you've got all these stories and they're putting all in. I kind of find ensemble casts end up kind of losing heart sometimes because you've got so many elements. Have you seen it yet?
No, I'm going to see it Saturday, so I'm looking forward to it. Yeah,
I am too. I hope it comes together.
Yeah, I think Marvel's been really smart about reinventing their style when they feel like getting stale, and I think Thor 3 for me was a perfect example of that. It was a series that I kind of lost interest in, and then I saw 3, and I was all in again.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those. I've seen all of them leading up to it, except for I didn't see the latest Spider-Man because they keep making Spider-Man like 100 times. I lost interest in that. Why do you think, on the other side of the coin, and I used to read these comics when I was a kid, but how come DC can't seem to get it together? I mean, we've got 100 different Batmans, okay, a couple Supermans. Why are they not able to replicate the magic that Marvel has? Is it management? Is it the story? Is it what? They're obviously, at different levels. Why do you think? I
mean, it's funny because financially they are a success, but I think in terms of
really?
Oh yeah. So I mean, Wonder Woman was a massive success.
Yeah,
but I'd say Wonder Woman's kind of the exception. I think that, and I hope that Wonder Woman is the sort of new DC, which is they're sort of learning that it's okay to not be this brooding, dark. It's kind of, that's their brand, had been this brooding, dark brand that was sort of started with Batman Begins, and they reinvented themselves to follow the Christopher Nolan style. But Christopher Nolan's Christopher Nolan, and he's going to be able to make whatever kind of movie he wants, and it's going to be awesome because he's who he is and he has the vision that he does. But
great director.
I think that they thought that was the style of movie they should make because it really got them in a direction that they were making hits. But I don't think it necessarily suits all of their characters. And I think if they realize it's okay to have your movie be fun, and I'm not saying it needs to be Guardians of the Galaxy, but give it some variety in tone and allow me to have fun while enjoying, something that can also be serious. I think they're going to have more success. And, I hope that's where they take Suicide Squad. And I hope that's where they take, and again, not every movie needs to be a fun ride, but at least appreciate the fact that some of them can be, and you don't need a brand tone that is monolithic.
Yeah. And what really, I was surprised was Deadpool. It's way out. I mean, it's a funny, it's a funny movie, but it's way out of the regular confines of a superhero type movie. It was so irreverent, and I just thought that was cool. They went out like that. It had so much personality. Yeah,
which is awesome. And a lot of that comes from Deadpool, the comic. He used to break the fourth wall in the comic, and it's awesome that Marvel decided it was time to do that. And I think it was smart that they didn't do that as their second or third film. They waited until, they needed to shake things up, and then they did. They threw that into the mix, and really it was a game changer.
And I know we're getting like geeky into specific movies, but I can't wait to see Deadpool 2. It looks funny already. But Deadpool does not make it into the other Marvel stuff, right?
I mean, he hasn't yet. So I gotta assume at some point he's gonna be let in because it'll be a big deal. So it's almost like it's smart to keep him out until you let him in, because then people will go see how he interacts with the Avengers. Or, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically they can run this thing on for as long as people are interested, right? I mean, there's just so many stories. There's so much going on. They could.
I mean, I don't see the end in sight. I have a lot of faith in Marvel figuring out how to continue reinventing themselves, as far out as I can see.
Yeah. That's amazing. So to look at the big picture, would you say this path that you purposely went down, do you have any regrets at all at getting into this? I mean, is there anything else you would have done, or is this pretty much, this was it? I mean, you've been following this for quite some time, since you were a kid.
No, I'd say this is it. I mean, at this point, I've been doing it for over half my life. I've been doing visual effects and working in commercials, film or series for over half my life. So it's been awesome. I've really enjoyed it. And I think the trick for me to stay interested is just to keep finding projects that I'm inherently interested in, and then figuring out what that next goal is to elevate where I am now and do something that is different and keep changing it and keeping things fresh.
Mm-hmm. So, that's a very important point, I think, is that you have to keep up. Well, we already talked about it, actually, which is adapting to the terrain. And that includes things that are happening in the time. How many monoliths like a Blockbuster or whatever didn't adapt, right? A lot of these big stores didn't adapt, and now they're done. So that's kind of a life lesson, I think.
Yeah, I think it's always important to not only, keep an eye on what your goal is, but make sure your goal is still relevant, and that you don't need to shift it to the left or to the right, or say, hey, you know what, that no longer exists. I don't want to be a taxi cab driver in New York because Uber has killed that entire market. I need to now do this.
Right.
Because that can happen and does happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so nice to talk and see someone that's in the mix with what they want to do and making it happen, and being flexible. It's funny because you've have a degree of success that a lot of people would love to be at, but really it's always moving forward, right? I mean, it's in some ways you're always kind of starting, where you are fresh every day when you wake up, and you're trying to move up and you're still going forward. It's more of a process than it is arriving at one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't know if that's just me, but that's the way that my mind's always worked, is trying to figure out where can I go from here. how can I take that next step up? Because it just keeps things interesting. I think to me, like the ultimate fear I think I have is just doing the same thing every day indefinitely. I think that would not be exciting to me, or at least not at this stage of my life. So it's always, what's the next exciting thing I can chase?
Right. Okay. Yeah. If you were stuck, like you said, I don't want to use the term stuck, because some people, want to have that type of setup with security. That's fine. But if you were just working in a unit, and like you said, at one point you felt like you were capped, and then that was it. Like, to me, that's not freedom.
Yeah. There's a certain volatility built into the job path that I'm on. At a certain point, every project, series, or feature, it ends, and you got to find a new job again. So you're constantly reinventing yourself. It's inherent to the job.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I think I like that.
Yeah, it can be exciting. It can also be terrifying at some points.
Yeah. So, kind of to wrap things up and put it in context of the Manceptional setup here, what would you say? It could be in general or in the movie realm that you're in, entertainment realm. What would you say makes a man manceptional? Meaning you've got your passion, you've got your vision, you're executing on it. What would you say would make up a manceptional type of person?
Yeah, I think it's having a clear goal and direction, and understanding what you want to do, and then moving towards that with confidence, but also understanding when you need to deviate and adjust the plan and adjust the goal in order to keep moving forward, as opposed to not reaching towards that next thing.
I think what you're saying is I'm finding to be somewhat universal with people that are going on their own path, right? You got to have that. I'll kind of summarize here. You got to have that passion. You got to put in the work. There's no shortcut to putting in the work and rolling with the train, kind of adjusting fire and moving yourself forward. That seems to be the pattern. And it's just so cool to speak with someone that's doing that in the entertainment field, which, it's glamorous to a lot of people, but it's also very cool. You're creating new things. And, it's just, I think a lot of people are very enamored of the whole thing. So I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, you bet. And yeah, absolutely. All those things that you said, they're definitely applicable to me.
Yeah. So right now, you're on Lost in Space, right? You're doing directing and the effects. Is that all you're focused on right now? I know you have your other stuff in development. Like, at what point you're waiting to see if another season is going to be picked up?
Yeah, absolutely. We're currently waiting to see another season's going to go, but yeah, I'm always writing on the side. So I have a feature that I'm working on, and a series pilot that I'm working on. So always keeping those things in the back burner, moving forward. So that way, again, when that opportunity arises, I have the thing necessary to move that ball down the court.
Okay. And you have another big challenge coming up, expecting a child.
Yeah.
That's a whole other journey.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that?
Really good. It's a really exciting thing to sort of add to the life experience. So no, I'm really looking forward to it.
That's awesome. So Jabbar, how can people best follow you and kind of see what you're doing next? What's the best thing to look you up on?
IMDb is probably the best. I don't have Twitter. I don't have. I'm just not a social media person, so I've failed in that regard. But I tried it when I had my feature, and it felt like I wanted to be like writing and working on my projects, and I was getting lost in these loops of social media. So I ended up just not pursuing it.
Which ones were you trying?
I did at the time. It was Twitter and Facebook. It was mainly Twitter and Facebook, going back and forth between those two.
There's just too much of it, too many of it, and I'm a fairly private person, so I never got on that stuff till recently, and I just started with Instagram, just posting some of my workout and martial arts type stuff, just for fun, no real goal, and that one's okay for me. I actually like that, but I've tried signing up for the other ones, and I've just never done I've never done a tweet. I've never done a bunch of stuff. It's just a little too much,
Yeah.
Well, okay. So just look you up on IMDb.
That is the best place to find out what I'm doing.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Jabbar, we can't wait to see what you do next. Everybody watch Lost in Space if you have Netflix. If you don't have Netflix, then, who doesn't have Netflix? It's a third of the internet traffic in the world. Well, at least in the US. So if you don't have Netflix, get Netflix. There's also, where can people find Alien Outpost aside from iTunes? I know it's on iTunes.
Yeah, I assume the current place to get it are Amazon and iTunes. It was on Netflix for a while, but it's run its time there. So I think Amazon and iTunes are the best place to find it.
Okay. And then, keep in mind if you are ever watching Game of Thrones, you might be watching something that Jabbar worked on. You said the ice wall scene was
season 5 and season 3 I was a supervisor on. So the ice climb in 3, the Daznak dragon battle in the pit of Daznak in 5. Those are sequences I had heavy involvement in.
Okay. And what about if someone's watching Iron Man, you worked on the suits, you said, Mark.
I did, yeah. The Mark 1, 2, 3 and the Ironmonger, which was the original name of the suit for, or Crimson Dynamo was the original name of the suit that Jeff Bridges wears.
Yeah. Okay. Is that all digital? So that's, you worked on that all digital, or is there an actual real?
No, there's a real suit. There's both. So we built all real versions of all 3 of those, or all 4 of those suits.
Okay. So if anyone watches Iron Man, and again, if you haven't seen Iron Man, maybe you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. I don't know who hasn't seen Iron Man, but when you see the suits, that's some more work from Jabbar. So he's all around you. So Jabbar, again, we wish you the best in your future work and look forward to following you and appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.